You give everything. You work 60 hours a week. You show up early. You stay late. You say yes when you're exhausted, when no one else will. You follow the rules. You play fair. You sacrifice your time, your health, your peace for the promise of someday, and still you're passed over. You watch others rise, faster, easier, while you wonder, what did I do wrong? But maybe the real question isn't about failure. Maybe it's this: what lie did they sell me about work, and why did I believe it? From childhood, you were told a story: work hard, be honest, keep your head down, say yes, don't complain, and one day, someday, it will all pay off. The system will notice. The world will reward you. Justice will arrive eventually. It's a beautiful story, and like most beautiful stories, it was designed to keep you believing, even when reality doesn't match the script. Because deep down, you've already seen the cracks. You've watched people climb not because of effort, but because of connections. You've watched those who cut corners, who charm the right rooms, who play the game rise. You've stayed late while someone else took credit. You've been loyal while others moved strategically. You've been moral and invisible. And in your most private moments, you feel it, a quiet betrayal, not just by others, but by the very rules you were taught to live by. A betrayal that wears the face of virtue, but hides a structure designed to keep you small. Friedrich Nietzsche saw this betrayal over a century ago. He wrote not to comfort, but to provoke, to rip away the illusions we cling to because they feel noble. One of his most piercing insights, that what we call moral labor, the humble, obedient, self-sacrificing work we're told is good, is not a virtue. It's a design, a psychological trap, a story written by the powerful to keep you useful, but never powerful. He called it slave morality, a moral system created by those without power and reinforced by those who benefit from your compliance. A system that praises your humility, but only because your ambition would be dangerous. This doesn't mean you've been weak. It means you've been conditioned to believe that pain is noble, that obedience is sacred, that being seen as good matters more than being sovereign, that working yourself to exhaustion is proof of worth. But here's the hard truth: the world doesn't reward goodness. It rewards leverage. It rewards those who understand how power moves. Not just those who labor, but those who position. Not just those who give, but those who choose when and to whom. Because in this world, morality without strategy becomes submission. Virtue without vision becomes a leash. And that's where the real awakening begins. This isn't about becoming cold or ruthless. Nietzsche never glorified cruelty. He challenged the worship of suffering. He asked, what if morality, stripped of power, becomes obedience in disguise? What if your virtue is not saving you, but silencing you? What if the system isn't broken, but working exactly as it was built? This video is not about telling you to stop working hard. It's about telling the truth about why hard work alone is no longer enough, and why the story of moral labor is the most seductive lie ever sold. A lie that keeps you grinding while someone else writes the rules. A lie that whispers, be good and you'll be seen, when the reality is, your goodness was never meant to be seen, only used. And now, finally, you're beginning to see it. You've done everything right. You've followed the script, the one they gave you in school, at home, in early jobs. You were dependable. You said yes even when it hurt. You delivered more than you were paid for, and you took pride in doing so. You believed that integrity would eventually be noticed, that loyalty would open doors, that if you just kept grinding, the right people would see you. But they didn't, because they were never looking. And now you're tired, not just physically, existentially. You don't just want rest, you want meaning. You want to understand why doing the right thing so often leads to being overlooked, underpaid, and emotionally drained. This is the conflict no one teaches you how to name, because the system was never built to reward obedience, only to depend on it. This is what we call the myth of moral labor. It's the invisible contract you were sold, that hard work is inherently noble, and that nobility will one day be exchanged for reward. But look closely, and you'll see it's a contract no one ever actually signed. It was implied, inherited, installed in you through praise, guilt, and repetition. A silent narrative engraved into your sense of identity. And while you were investing your identity into effort, others were investing in leverage. While you were trying to be good, they were learning how to be seen. You played by the rules. They learned who writes them. And the more moral you became, the more invisible you felt. You started to mistake self-erasure for integrity. You said yes to projects that drained you. You avoided conflict to keep the peace. You tolerated exploitation because complaining felt like weakness. You began to feel like maybe you were the problem, too sensitive, too honest, too principled for a world that doesn't seem to care. But here's the truth. You are not the problem. The problem is the story you were given, a story that made you believe your suffering was sacred and your silence was strength. It's why people pleasers are exhausted, why the most competent employees stay stuck while the loudest get promoted, why the most generous are often the most depleted. Because moral labor was never designed to elevate you, it was designed to stabilize the system. Your reliability keeps the machine running. Your silence keeps it unquestioned. Your loyalty sustains a structure that does not reciprocate. And yet, the world praises you, calls you humble, a team player, the backbone of the company. It gives you just enough validation to keep going, but never enough to rise. That's not an accident. That's engineering. Because the more you believe your virtue will be enough, the less likely you are to seek power. And the less you seek power, the easier you are to control. So the question isn't, why hasn't my work paid off? The question is, who profits when I believe that moral labor is enough? Friedrich Nietzsche didn't hate morality. He hated the way it was used. When he spoke of slave morality, he wasn't mocking kindness or compassion. He was revealing something more dangerous, how morality can be weaponized to pacify those who are most necessary, yet most exploited. Nietzsche observed two opposing moralities, one born from strength, master morality, and one born from survival, slave morality. Master morality begins with the self, creates its own values. It sees ambition, courage, risk, and power as virtues, not to dominate others, but to affirm life. It says, I decide what is good because I act from strength. Slave morality, by contrast, is reactive. It doesn't define values, it inverts them. It glorifies humility, obedience, and suffering because it must. It doesn't come from power, but from a need to find dignity in powerlessness. It says, I am oppressed, therefore I am good. And here's where it gets dangerous. Over time, slave morality became universal, not as a strategy for survival, but as unquestioned truth. Suffering was rebranded as sacred. Obedience became a sign of virtue. Sacrifice turned into a badge of honor. Self-erasure became the moral high ground, and you were raised in it. You were taught that pride is arrogance, that ambition is selfish, that saying no is rude, that wanting more is greedy. You were taught that strength is dangerous unless it's used to serve others quietly. You were taught that the highest good is to give, even when it empties you. But Nietzsche would ask, who benefits from this belief? The answer isn't abstract, it's structural. The more you believe suffering is noble, the more you'll endure injustice without protest. The more you believe obedience is virtuous, the less likely you are to challenge those in charge. And this is not about rejecting morality. It's about becoming conscious of how it operates. Because when morality is used to suppress your instinct for power, it becomes a tool of control. It becomes the leash they praise you for holding. This is why so many hardworking people feel stuck. They're operating from a moral framework designed to keep them striving, not rising. They're following rules that were never meant to serve them. They're burning out in service to a system that tells them, be good, stay small. But what if goodness isn't obedience? What if true morality requires power? The power to choose when to give, when to resist, when to leave. Nietzsche wasn't asking you to stop being good. He was asking you to define what good means on your own terms. He was asking you to stop confusing submission with strength, to stop calling your own silence a virtue, because until you understand that morality can be inherited and manipulated, you'll keep serving a system that praises your ethics but never lets you lead. And maybe that's the deepest lie of all, that power corrupts, when in truth, it's the absence of power that enslaves. You were taught that being good is enough, that if you just keep doing the right thing, with integrity, humility, and sacrifice, life will eventually make sense. But Nietzsche would argue, morality without strategy is just obedience dressed in virtue. Because in the real world, goodness without power gets ignored. The system you live in does not respond to virtue. It responds to pressure. It responds to presence, to influence. And influence, unlike effort, doesn't depend on how much you give. It depends on how well you understand the game being played. This isn't about becoming ruthless. It's about becoming aware. Morality is essential, but if you don't understand power, your morals will be used against you. You'll be praised for working weekends while someone else builds alliances. You'll be trusted, but never chosen. Respected, but never followed. Why? Because people with power are not necessarily more competent. They're simply more strategic. They know how to read the room, when to stay silent, when to speak, when to walk away. They understand leverage, the subtle architecture that shapes decisions behind closed doors. And most importantly, they don't wait to be rewarded. They choose their moves. You, on the other hand, may have been taught that choosing is selfish, that seeking power is wrong, that having boundaries is arrogant. You were taught to serve, not to steer. But here's the paradox. If you want your ethics to matter, you have to learn how to protect them. And protection requires power. Power doesn't have to mean manipulation. It can mean clarity, boundaries, silence, presence. It can mean saying no without guilt and yes without fear. It can mean choosing not to fight for approval, but for alignment. Choosing not to prove your worth, but to own it. Because here's the truth no one told you. The world doesn't just run on effort. It runs on structure, perception, momentum. And if you don't understand those forces, you will keep giving everything and getting crumbs in return. Nietzsche understood this. He didn't glorify dominance. He despised passivity masked as moral superiority. He saw that without consciousness, morality becomes a way to survive, not to live. So what does power look like for someone like you? It looks like discernment, knowing when your energy is being drained versus when it's being honored. It looks like walking away from systems that don't see you, and not with bitterness, but with calm conviction. It looks like building leverage, not to hurt others, but to protect yourself. Because principle without power gets manipulated, and power without principle corrupts. The real path isn't one or the other. It's learning how to hold both, with maturity, with silence, with strategic kindness. Because the world won't reward you for being good. But if you understand power, you can stop waiting for the world to reward you and start choosing where to place your goodness. At some point, something breaks. It's not loud. It's not dramatic. It's not a resignation letter slammed on a desk. It's quiet, subtle, inward. You stop chasing recognition. You stop explaining yourself. You stop proving your worth in places that have already decided to overlook you. The emotional emergency button has been pressed too many times, and now you step back, not because you've given up, but because you've finally woken up. This is the rupture, the sacred withdrawal, the moment when your exhaustion is no longer just physical, it's existential. And instead of asking, "What more can I give?" you begin to ask, "What have I given away?" This moment is terrifying, because you realize they never planned to reward you. They only planned to use you as long as you stayed available, as long as you stayed silent, as long as you kept believing that being good meant being compliant. And so, for the first time, you say no. No to unpaid loyalty, no to emotional debt, no to systems that equate your suffering with worth, no to applause that feels more like sedation than recognition. And that no feels like betrayal, but it's not. It's the beginning of self-respect. Nietzsche called this the first act of the free spirit, the moment you step outside the morality you were handed and begin to create your own. Not a morality of resentment, but of responsibility. You stop serving the machine blindly. You start asking, does this align with my becoming? This is where the world gets uncomfortable. Because once you stop playing the part of the moral workhorse, others begin to notice. Not your competence. They always saw that. What they notice now is your boundary. And boundary in a system built on your compliance is rebellion. You'll be told you've changed, that you're not a team player, that you're being selfish, difficult, ungrateful. But what they really mean is you're no longer manageable. You've reclaimed the one thing the system cannot exploit, your inner authority. This doesn't mean you become cruel. It means you stop giving energy where there is no reciprocity. It means your silence becomes strategic. Your absence becomes a message, because presence is power. And when you withhold it from what drains you, you begin to redirect it toward what builds you. This is not the end of your goodness. It's the beginning of your sovereignty. You no longer trade your time for crumbs. You no longer beg for fairness. You no longer hope that morality alone will carry you to peace. You understand now, peace is not given. It is chosen, and often it is chosen in solitude. So if you're in that space where you feel yourself detaching, stepping back, questioning everything, don't panic. You're not losing your way. You're finding your edge. And sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is disappear from the role they wrote for you and begin writing your own. Waking up doesn't mean becoming cold. It means becoming clear. The moment you step outside the myth of moral labor, you don't lose your values, you redefine your relationship to them. You stop worshiping sacrifice as a strategy. You stop confusing burnout with virtue. You stop asking for a seat at the table and start questioning the table itself. This isn't rebellion. This is maturity, because morality without self-awareness becomes a leash. But morality with consciousness, that's leadership. And leadership doesn't begin with authority over others. It begins with authorship over your own life. You don't have to abandon kindness. You have to stop weaponizing it against yourself. This is what Nietzsche pointed to with the concept of the Übermensch. Not a superhuman in the comic book sense, but a sovereign individual. Someone who no longer inherits values by default, but who creates them through choice, through clarity, through the courage to disappoint those who depended on your silence. And here's the key. You don't need to become ruthless to be free. You need to become strategic. Strategic kindness is not manipulation. It's alignment. It means helping when you choose to, not when you're coerced to. It means saying yes because it reflects your values, not because you're afraid to say no. It means being generous from overflow, not from obligation. It means knowing that your empathy is sacred and that sacred things deserve protection. This shift is quiet but radical. You start to notice which environments drain you, which leaders value control more than contribution, which systems depend on your silence to keep functioning. And you start to act not from resentment but from vision. Vision that says, I am no longer willing to trade my energy for survival. I want to build. Maybe that means starting something of your own. Maybe it means finally setting boundaries. Maybe it means walking away from a job, a dynamic, a belief, not because it's evil, but because it no longer fits the version of you that is emerging. You stop seeking approval from people who benefit from your passivity. You stop asking systems to validate a soul they were never designed to see. You begin to reclaim your time, your attention, your direction, and perhaps most importantly, your identity. You begin to see that influence isn't the opposite of integrity. It's what protects it. Because without power, your morality becomes decoration. A mask the system loves to applaud, as long as you stay manageable. But with power, the power to walk, to choose, to say no, your morality becomes something else entirely. Compass, not to guide others, but to finally, consciously guide yourself. This is the moment you stop waiting for life to reward your goodness and start designing a life where your goodness is protected, not exploited. Because morality was never meant to keep you obedient. It was meant to make you whole. So what do you do now? Now that you've seen it, the lie you were raised to believe. Now that the veil has lifted and you realize the system was never broken. It was built this way, on purpose, with precision. What happens after the awakening? For many, this is where despair begins. They think, if the world isn't fair, why try at all? But that's the final trap. Because the goal was never to make you hopeless. The goal is to make you conscious. Yes, the rules you were taught were designed to produce good workers, not powerful people. But power, real power, is now within reach. Not the kind that dominates others, the kind that frees you from needing their permission. And that starts not with rage, but with clarity. Not with destruction, but with design. You begin to see that your value is not determined by a title, a salary, or a system that profits from your exhaustion. Your value lives in your ability to choose where your energy goes, what your boundaries are, and who you allow to shape your sense of worth. You stop asking, will they see me? And start asking, do I see myself clearly enough to act accordingly? This shift is subtle, but it's everything. Because once you reclaim your power, the old patterns can no longer hold you. You don't owe anyone your silence. You don't owe your loyalty to systems that reward manipulation and punish integrity. You owe yourself one thing: sovereignty. Nietzsche didn't write to shame people. He wrote to awaken them, to offer the terrifying, liberating truth that you are not here to live by someone else's script. You are here to write your own. The world doesn't need more obedient workers. It needs conscious individuals. Those who understand how morality and strategy can coexist. Who know when to give and when to withhold. Who are not waiting for fairness, because they are building something beyond it. So ask yourself, what if your goodness was never the problem? Only your submission? What if you could be kind and clear, empathic and powerful? What if the most moral thing you could do is stop serving systems that were never designed for your growth? And what if, by choosing yourself, not out of ego but out of clarity, you finally stepped into the life you were meant to lead? The world doesn't reward moral labor, but it does respond to presence, to clarity, to truth, not just spoken but lived. So if something in you stirred, if something woke up, write in the comments. I reclaim my power, not for applause, not for validation, but to mark the moment when obedience ended and authorship began. And if you're ready for more silence, more clarity, more truth, subscribe. Not for noise, but for tools. Because awakening is only the beginning, and your sovereignty starts now.